Okay, let's switch gears and talk for a minute about definitions related to sexual assault and sexual crimes. So again, often these terms get used interchangeably, and there is a lot of overlap within these terms, but let's just go ahead and define them so that we're on the same page. So one term that you might hear in regards to sexual violence is sexual coercion. What this term is referring to is using verbal or physical means to obtain sexual activity against one's ability to consent. So often this is sort of a larger, more general term when talking about sexual violence. So sexual coercion can really incorporate a lot of different behaviors underneath. But the heart of it is really that piece about using some sort of verbal or physical means to obtain sexual activity or contact without the other person's consent. So relatedly, often this happens when drugs and alcohol are involved. If another person drugs an individual or encourages a lot of alcohol consumption and then tries to obtain sexual touching or sexual activity from them, that would be an example of sexual coercion. Sexual assault is another really common term that you're going to hear both in psychological research and also legally. So with sexual assault, again, it's another sort of big sort of umbrella term. It's a continuum of sex-related behaviors ranging from unwanted sexual contact all the way up to sexual intercourse. So again, a lot of the same behaviors that would be considered sexually coercive are also going to be considered sexual assault. Probably the most specific sexual crime that is easily defined is the term rape. So rape has a very specific definition and is associated with a very specific behavior. Unlike sexual assault and sexual coercion, it's not an umbrella term. It's referring to a very specific sexual act. So the definition of rape that we're going to talk about in this course is sexual aggression with bodily penetration. So we're talking about some type of sexual penetration from one person to another. Again, one person in this scenario is not consenting to this sort of sexual penetration, and that's what makes it rape. So I included a slide on Montana's definitions of sexual assault. And so I'm not going to read through that, but feel free to take a look at that and just get a sense of how Montana defines sexual assault and how it might differ from how we talk about sexual assault in psychological research, or how it might be pretty similar to how we talk about sexual assault research. So just like we had problems in trying to define what dating violence is, we also have similar problems when we're trying to define sexual assault. So those definitions that we just talked about, particularly with sexual assault and sexual coercion, they were very general and very sort of all-encompassing in terms of what might potentially constitute sexual assault. This is done for a specific reason. It's because when thinking about sexual assault, we're really talking about a continuum of behaviors that could potentially qualify as sexual assault. And so we want to try and keep that definition as broad as possible so that we're not excluding a behavior that would be considered sexual assault and could potentially be harmful to someone that might have experienced it. So under the Obama administration, not only did the definition of sexual assault expand, but also the definition of date rape expanded. So prior to this administration change, date rape actually was only defined as a man drugging a woman and engaging in sexual activity. And so the Obama administration expanded the definition to include both genders. So another problem that often comes up when trying to define sexual assault is this difficulty around consent. Often, there's a lot of controversy over what constitutes consent. So this controversy comes up frequently when drugs and alcohol are involved in a case of sexual assault. So the idea is that if drugs and alcohol are involved, the person that was intoxicated or drugged cannot provide consent for the sexual activity. That often gets questioned and gets misconstrued in cases of sexual assault, and it's a big area of problem, particularly in the United States. Other sort of issues that come up around defining sexual assault, there are a lot of different myths surrounding rape that come up culturally, particularly this idea that the victim of sexual assault somehow was asking for it, Often that comes up with the way the person dresses or talking in a suggestive manner. Just because someone dresses provocatively or in a particular way or talks suggestively doesn't necessarily mean that that person is giving consent by doing those things. Unfortunately, that's a really common myth that's propagated in the United States culture, and it often gets used in courtrooms as evidence for an individual providing consent. Additionally, there's sort of an issue around at what point in the sexual encounter can a person withdraw consent? So the answer is at any point during a sexual encounter, a person can withdraw consent. That is another issue that often gets debated, both in courtrooms and legally. This issue of consent is not only an issue nationally, but it's also an issue specifically for the campus at the University of Montana. So for those of you that have participated in the Campus Sexual Assault Survey, right now that survey has been going on for the past couple of years. And the data that's coming out of that survey really is saying that here at the University of Montana, a lot of undergraduate students and graduate students that participate in that study don't have a good understanding of what consent is and when consent can be withdrawn. So one of the great things that's come out of that survey is different educational programs that have been helpful in helping people to understand consent. And so if any of you have any questions surrounding consent or unsure about consent, please either let me know individually through email or write a discussion question about that, and I would be happy to talk about that with you. So how often does sexual assault occur, and what sort of risk factors are involved in sexual assault? So nationally, sexual assault occurs in 1 out of 5 women. So what that means is that 1 out of 5 women have either experienced sexual assault themselves or they will experience sexual assault at some point in their lifetime. That's a huge amount of people that have either experienced sexual assault or will experience sexual assault. So it's a really, really big problem right now, not only nationally, but in particular on college campuses. Additionally, in 3/4 of rape cases, the perpetrator of rape is someone that the victim knows. So there's sort of this myth that with rape and sexual assault, the perpetrator is the stranger that the person doesn't know and attacks them by jumping out of the bushes. That's not a very likely scenario. What research shows is that actually, in most cases, the perpetrator of rape is somebody that the victim knows. So there's some stats there about the relationships and how common different relationships are in terms of perpetrating rape. So for this particular study, 26% of individuals that perpetrated rape were intimately known by the victim. 53% of the individuals in this study experienced rape by an acquaintance. 3% had experienced rape perpetrated by a relative. And 18% had experienced rape perpetrated by a stranger. So you can see largely the majority of people in this study had experienced rape by someone that they knew.